The morning sun cast long shadows across the weathered fence posts of the McKinnon ranch as Samuel carefully mended a broken gate with steady, calloused hands. At 52, his once broad shoulders carried a permanent stoop, as if still bearing the weight of a soldier's pack 15 years after he'd last worn the Union blue. The Montana wind whistled through the valley, carrying with it the scent of sage and the distant sound of cattle lowing in the pasture. Samuel's weathered face, marked by deep lines around his grey eyes, remained focused on his work even as the sound of approaching hoofbeats reached his ears. 3 riders emerged from the dust cloud on the main road. Mayor William Harrison, Sheriff Tom Bradley, and Doc Patterson, their faces grim with purpose. Samuel's jaw tightened imperceptibly, but he continued working, hoping they might pass by without stopping. "Morning, Samuel," Mayor Harrison called out as they reined in their horses near the gate. The mayor, a portly man in his 50s with a carefully waxed mustache, dismounted with obvious reluctance, his expensive boots clearly not meant for ranch work. "We need to have a word with you." Samuel set down his hammer and straightened slowly, his back protesting the movement. "Morning, gentlemen. What brings you out here so early?" His voice carried the flat, measured tone of a man who had learned to keep his emotions carefully controlled. Sheriff Bradley, a lean man with prematurely grey hair and a permanent squint from years under the western sun, stepped forward. "It's about Blackjack Morrison and his gang, Sam. They hit the Hendersons' place last night, burned their barn, killed 3 head of cattle, and told them they had 1 week to come up with $50 or they'd be back for the house. That's the 5th ranch in 2 weeks, Doc Patterson added, his medical bag clutched tightly in his weathered hands. "The man's a menace, Samuel. Someone needs to stop him before he kills somebody." Samuel's expression remained neutral, but his knuckles whitened as he gripped the fence post. "That's what we pay the sheriff for, isn't it?" he said quietly, not looking directly at any of the men. Mayor Harrison's face flushed red. "Now, see here, McKinnon, Tom's a good lawman, but he can't be everywhere at once. Morrison's got at least 6 men riding with him, maybe more. We're forming a posse and we need experienced men who know how to handle themselves in a fight." "I'm a rancher now," Samuel replied, turning back to his work. "Haven't touched a gun in anger in 15 years, and I don't intend to start now." The silence that followed was heavy with judgment and frustration. Sheriff Bradley spat into the dust. "Sam, I fought alongside you at Antietam. I seen what you could do with a rifle. Hell, you saved my life at least twice that I can remember. What happened to that man?" Samuel's hammer struck the nail with more force than necessary, the sound echoing across the quiet ranch. "That man died at Gettysburg, Tom, along with a lot of other good men. I buried him deep and I aim to keep him that way." Doc Patterson stepped closer, his voice gentler than the others. "Samuel, we're not asking you to go looking for trouble, but these people, our neighbors, they're scared. The widow Morrison, not related to Blackjack, mind you, she's got 3 young children and no husband to protect them. The Johanssons just moved here from Sweden, barely speak English, and they don't understand why someone would want to hurt them. Then they should pack up and leave," Samuel said flatly, "or arm themselves. Every man has the right to defend his property." Mayor Harrison's voice rose with indignation. "That's easy enough for you to say sitting out here on your ranch, keeping to yourself. But what about when Morrison decides your spread looks profitable? What then?" Samuel finally looked up, his grey eyes cold as winter steel. "Then I'll handle it myself, like I always have." The 3 men exchanged meaningful glances. Sheriff Bradley cleared his throat. "Sam, folks in town are starting to talk. They're saying maybe the war took something out of you that can't be put back. They're saying maybe you've lost your nerve." The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Samuel's face remained impassive, but something flickered behind his eyes, a flash of pain quickly suppressed. He set down his tools and wiped his hands on his worn leather apron. "Let them talk," he said quietly. "I've got work to do, and you gentlemen have a posse to organize. I'm sure you'll find plenty of brave volunteers eager to play soldier." Mayor Harrison's frustration boiled over. "Damn it, McKinnon. People look up to you, whether you want them to or not. You were a war hero, for Christ's sake, a sergeant who led men into battle and brought them home alive. Now look at you, hiding behind your fence posts like some kind of—" He struggled for the words. "Like what?" Samuel's voice was dangerously quiet. "Like a coward," the mayor finished, immediately regretting the words but unable to take them back. The silence stretched between them like a drawn bowstring. Samuel's face showed no emotion, but his hands slowly clenched into fists at his sides. For a moment, Sheriff Bradley thought his old war companion might finally explode, might finally show some of the fire they all knew still burned somewhere inside him. Instead, Samuel simply nodded once. "I think you gentlemen should leave now." As the three men mounted their horses and rode away, Samuel remained standing by his gate, watching until they disappeared over the hill. Only then did he allow his carefully constructed composure to crack slightly. His shoulders sagged, and he leaned heavily against the fence post he had been mending. The word echoed in his mind: coward. He had been called worse things by better men, but somehow, coming from neighbors who had no idea what he carried inside him every day, it cut deeper than any bullet wound ever had. They wanted their war hero back, wanted him to pin on his medals and march off to fight their battles. They had no idea that the man they remembered had died screaming in a field hospital tent, delirious with fever, and calling for his dead friends. Chapter 2. Echoes of War. That evening Samuel sat alone on his porch, a cup of black coffee growing cold in his hands as the Montana sky painted itself in shades of orange and purple. The ranch house, modest but well-maintained, reflected his solitary life. Functional furniture, clean but sparse rooms, and not a single photograph or memento from his war years visible anywhere. He had buried those memories as deep as he could, but lately they seemed determined to claw their way back to the surface. The sound of the approaching wagon broke through his brooding thoughts. Samuel recognized the steady rhythm of old Moses, the draft horse belonging to the Johansson family. As the wagon came into view, he could see Eric Johansson driving, his wife Astrid beside him clutching their youngest child, while their two older children huddled in the wagon bed, surrounded by hastily packed belongings. Samuel rose slowly and walked out to meet them, his coffee forgotten on the porch rail. Eric's face was pale beneath his sun-weathered skin, and his usually perfect English was fractured by fear and his native Swedish accent. "Mr. McKinnon," Eric called out as he pulled the wagon to a stop. "Forgive us for disturbing you, but we have nowhere else to go." Astrid Johansson, a small woman with prematurely grey hair and worry lines around her blue eyes, clutched her baby tighter. "They came to our place just after sunset," she said in heavily accented English. 6 men, maybe 7. They said we had 3 days to pay them $30, or they would burn us out." Samuel's jaw tightened. "Did they hurt anyone?" "No," Eric replied, his hands shaking as he held the reins. "But they did things to scare us. Shot our milk cow, broke our windows. The tall one with the black beard, he put his gun to little Anna's head and said—" Eric's voice broke, and he couldn't continue. 8-year-old Anna, a blonde girl with her mother's blue eyes, peered over the side of the wagon. Despite her obvious fear, she spoke up in a clear voice. "He said if Papa didn't pay, he would take me with him. He said I was pretty enough to fetch a good price in Denver." The words hit Samuel like a physical blow. His hands clenched into fists at his sides, and for a moment, the careful control he had maintained for 15 years threatened to crack completely. Images flashed through his mind, not of Black Jack Morrison, but of another man, in another time, threatening another innocent child during the war. The memory of what he had done to that man, and the nightmares that had followed, made his stomach churn. "Where will you go?" Samuel asked, his voice carefully neutral despite the storm raging inside him. "We don't know," Astrid admitted, tears streaming down her face. "We spent everything we had to buy our land and build our house. We have maybe $5 to our name. Eric talked to the sheriff, but he said he couldn't spare men to guard every farm. He said we should join the posse or leave the territory." Eric straightened his shoulders with obvious effort. "I am not a fighter, Mr. McKinnon. I am a farmer. In the old country I grew wheat and barley. I came here to give my children a better life, not to make war on outlaws. But I will not let them hurt my family." Samuel looked at the family, the frightened parents, the wide-eyed children, the baby who slept peacefully despite the chaos surrounding her. They represented everything he had fought for during the war, everything he had tried to protect, and now they were asking him for help, just as Mayor Harrison and the others had done that morning. "You can't keep running," Samuel said finally. "Men like Morrison feed on fear. Give in once and they'll never let you alone." "Then what do we do?" Eric asked desperately. "I have a hunting rifle, but I am one man against many. And if something happens to me, what becomes of my family?" Samuel was quiet for a long moment, staring at the horizon where the first stars were beginning to appear. When he spoke, His voice was distant, as if he were talking to himself rather than to the Johansons. "During the war I had a sergeant under me named Danny Walsh. Irish boy from Boston, couldn't have been more than 19. He was scared all the time. Scared of battle, scared of dying, scared of letting his friends down. But when the fighting started, Danny was always right there where he needed to be, doing what needed to be done." He turned to look at Eric directly. "One day I asked him how he managed it, being so afraid but never backing down. You know what he told me? He said he wasn't brave, but he had people counting on him, and that was stronger than fear." Astrid clutched her husband's arm. "What happened to him? This Danny?" Samuel's expression darkened. "He died at Cold Harbor. Took a Confederate bullet meant for me. As he was dying, he made me promise to write to his mother, tell her he wasn't a coward, that he died protecting his friends." The wagon fell silent except for the gentle snorting of old Moses and the distant sound of night insects beginning their chorus. Finally, Eric spoke. "Mr. McKinnon, the people in town, they say you were a great soldier. They say you could help stop these men if you wanted to, but they also say—" He hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. "They say I'm a coward," Samuel finished for him. "I heard that assessment this morning." "Are you?" Anna asked suddenly, her child's directness cutting through the adult hesitation. "Are you scared like my papa?" Samuel looked down at the little girl, seeing in her innocent question the same directness that Danny Walsh had possessed. "Yes," he said simply. "I'm scared. More scared than your papa, I think. But that doesn't mean I won't do what needs to be done when the time comes." He stepped closer to the wagon. "You can stay here tonight. There's a spare room in the house, and I've got enough food to share. Tomorrow, we'll figure out what comes next." Eric's relief was visible. "Thank you, Mr. McKinnon. We will not be a burden, I promise." As Samuel helped the family unload their belongings, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was standing at a crossroads. For 15 years he had successfully avoided the violence and responsibility that had once defined his life. But now, looking at this frightened family seeking shelter under his roof, he realized that the war had followed him to Montana after all. The ghosts of his past weren't content to stay buried, and perhaps it was time to stop running from them. Chapter 3. The Line in the Sand. 3 days passed quietly at the McKinnon Ranch. Samuel had insisted the Johansson family stay until they could figure out a permanent solution, and despite his usual preference for solitude, he found himself oddly comforted by the sounds of family life. Astrid humming Swedish lullabies to the baby, Eric teaching his son how to properly stack firewood, and little Anna following Samuel around the ranch, asking endless questions about the cattle and horses. On the 4th morning, Samuel was showing Eric how to repair a section of fence when the thunder of approaching hoofbeats shattered the peaceful morning air. 7 riders crested the hill overlooking the ranch, their horses kicking up clouds of dust in the dry Montana air. Even at a distance, Samuel could see the glint of sunlight off drawn weapons. "Eric, get your family inside the house," Samuel said quietly, his voice carrying a tone of authority that the farmer had never heard before. "Now." Eric didn't argue. He dropped his tools and ran toward the house, calling for Astrid in urgent Swedish. Samuel watched the riders approach, his experienced eye cataloguing details, the way they spread out to control multiple approaches, the casual confidence with which they held their weapons, the deliberate intimidation in their slow advance. The man leading the group was tall and broad-shouldered, with a black beard that reached nearly to his chest and cold, calculating eyes that seemed to take in every detail of the ranch. This had to be Black Jack Morrison, the outlaw who had been terrorizing the region. He rode a magnificent black stallion that probably cost more than most farmers made in a year, and his clothing, while dusty from the trail, was expensive and well-tailored. "So you must be Samuel McKinnon," Morrison called out as the group reined in their horses about 20 yards from the house. His voice was cultured, with traces of a southern accent that suggested education and breeding, not the rough frontier drawl Samuel had expected. "I've heard a lot about you from the folks in town." Samuel stood perfectly still, his hands at his sides, showing no fear but making no aggressive moves. "And you're Black Jack Morrison. I've heard about you too." Morrison laughed, a sound without warmth or humor. "All bad, I'm sure, but then history is written by the victors, isn't it? Speaking of history, I understand you were quite the soldier during the recent unpleasantness between the states. A sergeant, wasn't it, Union Army?" "That was a long time ago," Samuel replied evenly. "Indeed it was. I myself served with distinction under General Lee until those final dark days at Appomattox." Morrison's eyes hardened. I've often wondered what I might have done if I'd encountered you on the battlefield, Sergeant McKinnon. Fate has an interesting way of providing second chances, don't you think? One of Morrison's men, a nervous-looking gunfighter with a scar running from his left ear to his jaw, spoke up. Boss, maybe we should just get to business. That farmer's probably watching from inside, getting more scared by the minute. Morrison raised a gloved hand for silence, never taking his eyes off Samuel. Patience, Donovan. I'm having a conversation with a fellow veteran. It's not often I get to speak with someone who truly understands the art of warfare. He leaned forward in his saddle, his voice taking on a more serious tone. Here's the situation, Sergeant. I know you're harboring the Johansson family. They owe me $30, a very reasonable fee for my protection services in this dangerous territory. I also know that yesterday you visited the bank in Cedar Falls and withdrew exactly that amount from your account. Samuel's expression didn't change, but internally he cursed the small-town gossip network that made privacy impossible. You're well informed. Information is power, as any good military man knows. Now you can make this easy on everyone by simply paying the Johanssons' debt and sending them on their way. They're not your responsibility, after all. You've done your Christian duty by giving them shelter, but this is business. And if I refuse? Morrison's smile was cold as winter steel. Then we'll take what we're owed from whatever source we can find. The Johanssons have a very pretty daughter, as I mentioned to them the other day. There are men in Denver who pay handsomely for young girls with blonde hair and blue eyes, more than enough to cover the debt, with interest. The words hit Samuel like a physical blow, and for a moment, the careful control he had maintained for 15 years cracked visibly. His hands clenched into fists, and Morrison's men immediately tensed, several of them shifting their gun hands to better positions. Morrison noticed the reaction with obvious satisfaction. Ah, there's the soldier I've heard so much about, the war hero who saved so many lives. Tell me, Sergeant, how many men did you kill during the war? How many Confederate soldiers fell to your rifle? How many boys who were just following orders, just trying to get home to their families? Samuel's voice, when he finally spoke, was barely above a whisper. More than I can count, more than I can forget. And yet here you stand, playing the peaceful rancher, pretending that violence isn't sometimes necessary, pretending that good men don't sometimes have to do terrible things to protect what matters. Morrison straightened in his saddle. I'm offering you a choice, McKinnon. $30 and everyone walks away. Or we take what we're owed in other ways, and you get to live with the consequences of your inaction. From inside the house, Samuel could hear the baby crying, and Astrid's soothing voice trying to calm her. Little Anna's face appeared briefly at a window, before Eric quickly pulled her away. The sight of that frightened child's face made something crystallize in Samuel's mind. You know what the difference is between a soldier and a murderer? Samuel asked, his voice growing stronger. A soldier fights to protect something. A murderer just takes what he wants. Morrison's expression darkened. Careful, Sergeant. You're outnumbered 7-1, and I know for a fact you haven't touched a gun in years. The whole territory knows about your reluctance to engage in violence. Some might call it cowardice. Samuel took a step forward, and the casual movement caused several of Morrison's men to reach for their weapons. But Samuel ignored them, his focus entirely on their leader. I've been called that word twice this week, he said quietly. And maybe it's true. Maybe I am a coward. Maybe I am afraid of what I might become if I pick up a gun again. But I'll tell you something, Morrison. There are some lines a man can't cross and still call himself human. Threatening children is one of them. Morrison's patience finally snapped. Enough philosophy, Sergeant. You have until sunset to deliver $30 and the Johansson family to the main road outside town. If you fail to meet this deadline, we'll come back and collect our due in whatever form we find most convenient. He turned his horse and called over his shoulder as the group began to ride away. And McKinnon? Don't think about running to the sheriff or organizing some kind of resistance. I have friends in town who keep me informed of such things. This is between you and me now. As the riders disappeared over the hill, Samuel remained standing in his yard, his mind racing through possibilities and consequences. Eric emerged from the house, his face pale with fear. Mr. McKinnon, I heard what he said. We cannot let you pay our debt. It is not right. Samuel turned to look at the farmer, and Eric was startled by the change in his expression. The quiet, reserved rancher was gone, replaced by something harder, more focused. For the first time, Eric could see traces of the soldier Samuel had once been. "This isn't about debt anymore, Eric," Samuel said quietly. "This is about what kind of men we choose to be when everything is on the line." Chapter 4. The Weight of Decision. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the McKinnon ranch as Samuel sat alone on his porch, cleaning an old Colt revolver with practiced mechanical movements. The weapon had remained hidden in a locked box beneath his bed for 15 years, wrapped in oiled cloth, along with his sergeant's stripes and a few faded letters from home. Now it lay across his knees, its steel surface gleaming despite the years of neglect. Eric approached cautiously, his footsteps quiet on the wooden porch boards. "Mr. McKinnon? My wife, she is very worried. She wants to know if we should try to leave before sunset." Samuel continued cleaning the revolver, checking the cylinder and testing the action. "Where would you go? Morrison's got men watching the roads. Even if you made it to the next territory, do you think he'd just forget about you? Men like him don't let debts go unpaid. It's bad for their reputation." "Then what do we do?" Samuel held the gun up to the light, examining it carefully. "We make our stand here, together." Eric's voice cracked with fear. "But I told you, I am not a fighter. I don't know how to use guns like that. I will just get in your way." "Doesn't matter." Samuel loaded 6 cartridges into the cylinder with smooth automatic movements. Sometimes fighting isn't about being good with a gun. Sometimes it's just about being willing to stand up when standing up needs to be done. The sound of approaching horses interrupted their conversation. Samuel looked up to see a single rider approaching, Sheriff Bradley, riding hard and looking grim. The lawman's horse was lathered with sweat, suggesting he had ridden fast from town. "Sam!" Bradley called out as he dismounted. "Thank God you're still here. I was afraid Morrison might have already—" He noticed the gun in Samuel's hands and stopped short. "Hell, Sam, you thinking about doing something foolish?" Samuel stood slowly, holstering the revolver. "Depends on your definition of foolish, Tom." Bradley climbed the porch steps, his weathered face showing deep concern. "Morrison sent word to town that he's coming back here at sunset. He's claiming you stole something that belongs to him. Says he has the right to retrieve his property by force if necessary." "His property?" Eric stepped forward, anger overcoming his usual politeness. "My family is not property." "I know that, Eric. But Morrison's got friends in town, men who owe him money or are too scared to cross him. The mayor's called an emergency meeting, and half the town council is talking about staying out of it entirely. They're saying it's between you and Morrison now." Samuel's expression hardened. "What about you, Tom? What's the sheriff's position on men who threaten children?" Bradley's jaw tightened. "You know where I stand, Sam. But I'm one man with a deputy who's barely 19 years old. Morrison's got 7 experienced gunfighters. If I try to arrest him, I'll just get myself killed, and then who'll protect the town? So you want me to handle it for you? I want you to be smart about this." Bradley grabbed Samuel's arm. "Come into town with me. Bring the Johansons. We'll figure out some kind of protection. Maybe organize a proper posse." Samuel pulled his arm free. "We both know there won't be a posse, Tom. The men in town are scared, and they have every right to be. Morrison's not just some drunk cowboy causing trouble on Saturday night. He's a professional killer with a military background and men who'll follow his orders without question." From inside the house came the sound of Astrid singing softly to her baby, a Swedish lullaby that spoke of home and safety and better times. The melody drifted through the open windows, somehow making the approaching confrontation seem even more stark and inevitable. "There's something else," Bradley said quietly. "Doc Patterson was treating one of Morrison's men yesterday, fellow named Kowalski, who got kicked by a horse. While he was patching him up, Kowalski was talking about what Morrison's really planning. He's not just after the $30, Sam. He wants to make an example out of you." "What kind of example?" "The kind that shows the whole territory what happens to war heroes who forget their place. Morrison's been building his reputation by breaking men who used to be somebody. There was a former cavalry officer down in Wyoming last year, and a Union colonel in Colorado the year before that. He challenges them, breaks them publicly, and then their communities lose faith in the idea that anyone can stand up to him." Samuel was quiet for a long moment, absorbing this information. "So this was never about the Johansons at all?" "Oh, he'll hurt them if he gets the chance, don't mistake me on that. But you're the real prize, the famous Sergeant McKinnon, reduced to begging for mercy or running away with his tail between his legs." Eric had been listening to this conversation with growing horror. "Mr. McKinnon, please, Take your friend's advice. Come to town with us. My family, we will find another way." Samuel looked at the farmer, seeing the desperation in his eyes, the way his hands shook as he pleaded, "Eric, let me tell you about the first time I killed a man. It was at Bull Run, and I was 18 years old, scared out of my mind and firing blind into the smoke. When the battle was over, I found a Confederate soldier lying 20 feet from our position. He couldn't have been more than 16, and he was calling for his mother as he died. The porch fell silent except for the distant lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. I spent the next 4 years telling myself that boy died for something important, preserving the Union, freeing the slaves, keeping families like yours safe from men who would use them as property. But you know what I realized when I got home? War doesn't really end, it just changes locations and finds new victims." Samuel walked to the edge of the porch and stared out at the horizon where the sun was beginning its descent toward evening. "Morrison's right about one thing. I have been hiding. Not from him, not from violence, but from the man I used to be. The man who could look at that dying boy and keep pulling the trigger because the cause was righteous." He turned back to face Bradley and Eric. "But maybe that man is exactly who we need right now." Bradley shook his head. "Sam, you can't fight 7 men alone. It's suicide." "Who says I'll be alone?" Samuel nodded toward Eric. "This man came here to build a better life for his family. That's worth fighting for. And you, Tom, you became a sheriff because you believe in protecting people who can't protect themselves. That's worth fighting for too." Eric's voice was barely above a whisper. "You would do this for us? Risk your life for strangers?" Samuel smiled, and for the first time in 15 years, it reached his eyes. "You're not strangers anymore, Eric. You're neighbors. And sometimes that makes all the difference." As the sun continued its descent toward the western mountains, Samuel McKinnon began preparing for a battle he had spent 15 years trying to avoid. But this time, he wasn't fighting for distant political causes or abstract principles. This time, he was fighting for a scared little girl with blonde hair and blue eyes, for parents who had crossed an ocean looking for safety, and for the simple idea that some things were worth the risk of becoming a killer again. Chapter 5. The Last Stand. The sun hung low on the western horizon, painting the Montana sky in shades of crimson and gold when the sound of approaching riders echoed across the valley. Samuel stood in the middle of his ranch yard, the weight of his holstered revolver familiar yet strange after so many years. Behind him, Eric Johansson crouched behind an overturned wagon, clutching his hunting rifle with white knuckles, while Sheriff Bradley had positioned himself near the barn with a clear view of the approaching trail. Inside the house, Astrid held her children close, singing the same Swedish lullaby she had been humming all afternoon, a desperate attempt to maintain some semblance of normalcy in a world that had suddenly turned violent and unpredictable. 7 riders crested the hill, moving with the casual confidence of men who had never met serious resistance. Blackjack Morrison rode at their head, his black stallion prancing with barely contained energy. In the fading light, the outlaw leader looked even more imposing, a figure from a nightmare all shadow and menace against the darkening sky. "Sergeant McKinnon," Morrison called out as the group spread into a loose semicircle about 30 yards from the house. "I see you've decided to make this interesting, and Sheriff Bradley, how unexpected to find you here. I thought we had an understanding about jurisdictional boundaries." Bradley stepped into view, his badge glinting in the dying light. "The jurisdiction of right and wrong doesn't have boundaries, Morrison, and threatening children crosses every line I know." Morrison laughed, the sound carrying clearly in the still air. How noble, how utterly pointless. He dismounted slowly, his movements deliberate and theatrical. "Gentlemen, I gave you until sunset to resolve this matter peacefully. The sun is now touching the mountains, and I don't see $30 or the Johansson family waiting for me at the road." Samuel took a step forward, his voice carrying the authority of a man who had once led soldiers into battle. "The only thing you're getting from this ranch is a chance to ride away alive. Take it." Brave words from a man who spent 15 years running from his own shadow. Morrison began walking forward, his hand resting casually on his gun butt. "Tell me, Sergeant, do you still dream about the war? Do you still hear the screams of the men you killed? Do you still wake up in the middle of the night, wondering if you're a hero or just another murderer in a blue uniform?" The words hit their target. Samuel's face tightened, but his voice remained steady. "Every night. But I've learned the difference between killing for a cause and killing for pleasure. You haven't. Morrison stopped about 15 feet away, close enough that Samuel could see the cold calculation in his eyes. "The difference, my dear Sergeant, is that I'm honest about what I am. I don't hide behind noble causes or tell myself pretty lies about duty and honor. I take what I want when I want it, and I sleep very well at night." From behind the wagon, Eric's voice cracked with fear and determination. "My daughter, she is only 8 years old. What kind of man threatens a child?" "The kind who understands that fear is the most effective weapon ever invented," Morrison replied, without taking his eyes off Samuel. "Your daughter will bring a good price in Denver, farmer. Pretty blonde girls always do. Unless, of course, someone here decides to be reasonable." Samuel's hand moved toward his gun, but Morrison was faster. The outlaw's revolver cleared leather with practiced ease, the barrel pointed directly at Samuel's chest. Around the yard, Morrison's men drew their weapons with mechanical precision, creating a deadly crossfire that covered every angle of escape. "Ah, there's the soldier I've been waiting to meet," Morrison said softly. "For a moment, I thought 15 years of peace had made you completely soft. But I can see it in your eyes now, that look men get when they're ready to kill or die. I've missed that look." Sheriff Bradley's voice cut through the tension. "Morrison, you're under arrest for extortion, theft, and threatening the lives of civilians. Drop your weapons and surrender." Morrison's laugh was genuinely amused. "Sheriff, you're outnumbered 7-3, assuming the farmer can actually hit anything with that rifle. Your deputy isn't here. The town council has abandoned you, and you're facing men who've been killing professionally for years. Exactly what makes you think you can arrest anyone? Because some things are worth dying for," Bradley replied simply. The standoff stretched taut as a bowstring, 7 guns against 3, with the lives of an innocent family hanging in the balance. In the house, little Anna's voice could be heard, asking her mother why the men outside were shouting, and Astrid's whispered reassurances that everything would be all right. Samuel closed his eyes for a moment, and suddenly he was 18 again, standing in a field outside Manassas, listening to Confederate soldiers calling for their mothers as they died. He thought of Danny Walsh, the frightened Irish boy who had died protecting his friends. He thought of all the choices that had led him to this moment, the battles fought, the lives saved and lost, the long years of trying to forget who he had been. When he opened his eyes, Morrison was smiling. "What will it be, Sergeant? Will you die for these strangers? Will you force your friends to die with you, or will you finally admit that some battles can't be won by good intentions and righteous anger?" Samuel's answer came not in words, but in action. His hand moved to his gun with fluid precision, 15 years of rust falling away like old paint. The Colt cleared leather just as Morrison's finger tightened on his trigger, and for a heartbeat that lasted an eternity, the two men faced each other across the yard, the soldier and the outlaw, the protector and the predator. The gunshot echoed across the valley like thunder, followed immediately by a staccato burst of rifle fire as the battle erupted in earnest. Samuel felt the burn of Morrison's bullet graze his shoulder as his own shot took the outlaw leader center mass, spinning him backward into the dust. Around the yard, muzzle flashes lit the gathering darkness as Bradley and Eric added their fire to the chaos. Morrison's men, caught off guard by the sudden violence, returned fire wildly. One of them, the nervous gunfighter called Donovan, took a rifle bullet from Eric's position and toppled from his horse with a scream. Another fell to Bradley's accurate shooting, his pistol flying from nerveless fingers as he pitched forward. But Samuel's attention was focused entirely on Morrison, who was struggling to rise from the dirt, blood spreading across his expensive shirt. The outlaw leader's eyes burned with rage and disbelief as he raised his gun for one final shot. You were supposed to be broken," Morrison gasped, his voice thick with blood and fury. "The war was supposed to destroy you, make you weak, make you afraid." Samuel walked toward him slowly, his smoking revolver held steady. "The war did destroy me," he said quietly. "But some things are stronger than fear. Some things are worth being destroyed for." Morrison's gun wavered, his strength failing. "The children, they'll never be safe." "Yes, they will," Samuel replied, and pulled the trigger one final time. The silence that followed the last gunshot was deafening. Smoke drifted across the yard, and the acrid smell of gunpowder mixed with the scent of blood and dust. Of Morrison's 7 men, 4 lay dead in the dirt. 2 had fled into the darkness on horseback, and 1 sat against the barn wall, clutching a wounded arm and staring at Samuel with undisguised terror. Sheriff Bradley emerged from cover, blood streaming from a graze on his forehead, but otherwise unharmed. Eric stood shakily, his rifle empty but his family safe. From the house came the sound of the door opening, and Astrid appeared with her children, little Anna breaking free to run towards Samuel. "Mr. McKinnon," the little girl cried, throwing her arms around his waist. "You saved us. You weren't a coward at all." Samuel holstered his gun and knelt down to the child's level, his hands shaking slightly from adrenaline and delayed shock. "Sometimes being brave isn't about not being scared, Anna. Sometimes it's about doing what's right, even when you're more frightened than you've ever been in your life." 3 days later, the territorial governor arrived in Cedar Falls with a detachment of cavalry soldiers to investigate the death of Black Jack Morrison and his gang. After interviewing witnesses and examining the evidence, he declared the shooting justified and commended Samuel McKinnon for his courage in protecting innocent civilians. The ceremony was simple but moving. In front of the entire town, the governor presented Samuel with a medal for civilian heroism, while a young cavalry captain read a letter from the territorial commander praising his actions. But the moment that meant the most to Samuel came when little Anna Johansson stepped forward and presented him with a hand-drawn picture of a man she labeled Hero Soldier Sam. As the crowd dispersed and life in Cedar Falls began to return to normal, Samuel found himself changed in ways he couldn't fully articulate. The nightmares still came, but they were different now, tempered by the knowledge that he had used his deadly skills to protect rather than destroy, to build rather than tear down. Eric Johansson approached him as he prepared to return to his ranch. "Mr. McKinnon, my family, we will never forget what you did for us. If there is anything at all we can do to repay you." Samuel smiled, and this time it came easily. "Just build your farm, Eric. Raise your children. Live the life you came here to live. That's payment enough." As Samuel rode back to his ranch in the gathering dusk, he carried with him the knowledge that some battles were worth fighting, that some causes were worth the risk of becoming a killer again. He had found his peace not in avoiding violence, but in using it for the right reasons. Behind him, the lights of Cedar Falls twinkled in the darkness, a small frontier town where families could sleep safely, because one man had finally stopped running from who he used to be and embraced who he needed to become. The war was finally over,